Hi, and welcome to Nevaeh's Nightmare. And on this episode, we are going to be talking to Jenny Ashford, who is an author, a graphic designer, a YouTuber, and runs 13 o'clock. So what got you interested in all of this? Just like the YouTube channel, everything.
Oh my gosh. It happened like really organically, I guess. The first thing, I had been a graphic designer since the 1990s, so I've been doing that a really long time. And I was also like always really into writing. Like I had written a couple horror novels and, short stories and stuff. And then when I hooked up with my partner and my co-host Tom Ross, and we started doing like paranormal books together because he had like a paranormal story that I thought was really interesting. And so we wrote a book together, and then I got hooked up with like another guy who was like a parapsychologist, and we wrote some books together. Then I started writing about true crime and things like that. Originally, like when we started doing the YouTube show, which I mean honestly is kind of like metastasized and become like pretty much my full-time thing now, is that we initially started doing that show just kind of like as a platform to sell my books because that was kind of my main thing. But as time went on, we kind of added more things and kind of found like we were having a good time with it. We started out just mostly doing paranormal topics like ghosts and stuff, and maybe like some true crime. But then we just expanded into doing movie reviews and just a bunch of other stuff. So now it's just we like put up something every day pretty much. And I started doing horror movie reviews on my own and horror book reviews on my own. So there's so much content on there that it's ridiculous. And I don't know. It's basically like me making as much work for myself as humanly possible because that's how I do.
I fully
You
understand that.
know?
So since you've been with Tom, I know a little bit about his little poltergeist thing that went on. Have you experienced anything since you've been with him?
Yeah, it's funny because I hadn't before. I've always been like really skeptical and everything, which I think was one of the best things, like why the book that we wrote came out good because I believed what he saw, but I kind of was coming at it from a more skeptical standpoint. But when we were working on the book, and this was probably back in, I want to say like 2015 or 2016, something like that, whenever we were working on the book all the time. So we were talking about the book all the time, and we did have some very, very minor poltergeist activity happen at our old house. Basically, we were like in the living room one night, and a couple of our friends were over at the house. And we were like, starting a movie. We were doing, pay per view or something. We were getting frustrated; it wasn't working. And then all of a sudden, the remote control was on the coffee table, and it picked itself up and like flew across the room like a little bit. And we were all just kind of like, and we all like the four of us saw it, and we were just looking at it going, did that just happen? Like that just picked up and just flew
Yeah.
across the room, did it? And yeah, we were like, oh yeah, that did. And then after that, we had some more kind of more unusual activity happen. We had now one day, now I didn't see this because I was at work, but we had like all of these little statues like over the cabinet, like in our kitchen, and they all like a couple of them like flew off and a couple of them broke like on the kitchen floor because Tom got mad about something. And so that happened. We had one morning where I woke up and the door out to our patio was wide open and the deadbolt was still engaged. So I don't, and we never opened that door, so we couldn't figure out how that had happened. We had the garage door open by itself all the time. We had the doorbell would ring like in the middle of the night, no one was there. So we had like minor things like that happen, but it wasn't anything like what Tom described happening to him like back in the 80s. But
Okay.
it was enough that I was just kind of like, oh, that's neat. Like it didn't really scare me, but I
Yeah.
just thought it was cool that I was finally like seeing some of it after
Yeah.
hearing so much about it.
So have you ever experienced anything that did scare you?
Not so much. It's like I really haven't seen I mean pretty much that was the most I don't know, the most obviously like paranormal thing that I've ever seen. And I guess it didn't scare me because Tom and I had talked about it so much that, and I was pretty sure that it was just like him, like it was his subconscious doing it. And so I was kind of, so I didn't think it was like, a ghost or a demon or anything like that. So it didn't really bother me. And honestly, like prior to that, I think the only thing, at least like from a paranormal, like, or what might seem like a paranormal standpoint, that would scare me was, I don't know, like I was in my grandmother's house one time and I thought I felt somebody standing behind me. Like I had a really, really strong sense that there was somebody there, and that kind of freaked me out. And like I turned around and there was nobody there. But that's pretty much it. I think, and then one time I was in a store and I felt like I have to get out of here immediately. Like there was this really
Yeah.
horrible, like, yeah, but I've only had that happen one time and I can't really explain it. Like I don't know why that happened or why it was in
Yeah.
that particular spot or anything like that. But that's about it.
Interesting. Okay. So how did you become interested in like true crime?
Um, Honestly, I think I don't even remember. I think I've been interested in that kind of thing like since I was a kid. Pretty as as soon as I learned to read, as soon as I was aware of being interested in things, I loved creepy stuff. That's like all I wanted, whether it was true stuff or whether it was ghost stories or whatever it was, that was my favorite thing. And I just wanted to read about all that kind of like the creepiest stuff imaginable all day long. I wanted to read ghost stories. I wanted to read about serial killers. I wanted like all that kind of stuff. So I kind of feel like maybe, I don't know. I always kind of make a joke that's like I think some people just have like a genetic predisposition to really like that kind of thing because like my parents weren't into that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
but for whatever reason, I was just, as soon as I could, as soon as I got old enough to read, I was like, I want to read about ghost stories and murders and stuff like that. And I don't really know why. That's just kind of, I don't know. That's just how I'm wired, I guess.
Yeah. So what prompted you to start writing about it?
I think, well, like I said, I think I started out mostly doing horror fiction. I mean, when I was a kid, that's pretty much all I wanted to be was a writer. And so I would write all these horror stories and I got into that. And then like I said, when I started talking to Tom, it never really occurred to me to write anything that was nonfiction necessarily, especially not in the paranormal realm, because like I said, I was more skeptical about that. But when Tom and I started like doing the book, and then I kind of got interested in doing that, I did the book with him, and then I did a couple books with Steve Mara, the parapsychologist, and then I did like a compendium of like poltergeist cases from all the way back in history. So I did that. And then I was saying to Tom, I was like, it's like I think I've kind of exhausted as much as I was interested in the paranormal thing. And I said, I've always really wanted to write about crime, about true crime. And I kind of feel like that's maybe a wider audience as well, like than maybe paranormal is. So that's when I kind of started getting into doing that because we had done on the show, we had done a lot of true crime topics, and I always found those the most interesting. So I said, well, why don't I do the same thing that I did with the paranormal book, and I'll just do like a compendium of like all these unsolved murders. And it ended up again like metastasizing, and it turned into a big trilogy where I covered like pretty much the whole 20th century. But I stuck only with unsolved murders, so I didn't really like do serial killers or anything like that. And I try to keep I actually started another YouTube channel where I'm doing little videos about unsolved murders, and I have a website too where I post like an unsolved murder thing every day because I wanted to keep the stuff from my book like updated. So if there
Hmm.
was something that was in my book that's been solved subsequently, which I have had happen, then I'll go in there and I'll kind of run down what was in the book, and then I'll say, oh, well, and since then, since the book came out, this got solved, or the DNA or whatever. So so I like to kind of keep that. Uh, I don't know, just kind of like updated and present. So I've kind of gone more in a true crime direction, and I still eventually I would like to get back to writing some more horror fiction too, because I actually have about, I guess it's probably like a quarter or a third of a novel written, but and I keep thinking about it, but I just can't, I never have time to like get back to it. And that's actually
Yeah.
based on an actual true crime case, but I'm going to fictionalize it heavily and like add supernatural elements to it and stuff. But Yeah, eventually I would like to get back to doing that because I really do miss, writing about horror fiction as much as I do like writing about true crime.
Yeah. So I know you were talking about like unsolved murders and you update them and let people know like if they have been solved. So how do you feel about like I don't know how to explain this. Like people are saying that they solved the Zodiac killer cases. Do you think that's true?
I doubt it. That's the thing. We had done a show about the Zodiac like a while back, and then a year ago we did, Zodiac Revisited because there'd been like some new, movement on it. And then just a couple weeks ago we did a third show about the Zodiac because there had been another like series of people that had come forward. But I don't know. I kind of feel like this is going to have to be one that they're going to have to definitively like come out with the DNA, just like they did like with the Golden State Killer. It's like, yeah, we're pretty sure it's this guy and stuff because I mean, anybody could kind of come up. And some of the stuff that I've heard, I'm not saying that, some of the people that have come out as being like this suspect and that suspect. I'm not saying that they're all wrong or they're not. It has to be somebody, right?
Right.
It has to be a person. So but I don't know. I've just gotten really skeptical and really kind of like burned about this. Like, oh, well, it could be this guy because of this, that, and the other. I'm like, well, yeah, okay, that sounds reasonable. But until they have the DNA, I'm just not real. It's interesting to talk about, and
Yeah.
I think that they eventually will solve it. But it's just everybody kind of gets their hopes up, when they announce. But the thing about it is that it's not like the FBI that's coming out and saying, "Yeah, we found the person." It's like a journalist or I think the last one that came out, it was just like a bunch of people that were like, it was just a kind of a freelance
Yeah.
group. They had some cops on there and things like that were retired and whatnot, but and I'm not saying that the guy that came up with it that wasn't the guy. It's just that until the FBI or whoever comes forward and said, yeah, they did figure out who it was, then I'm just gonna
Yeah.
not you know what I mean? Just not go there. I'm just be like, yeah, it could be.
Yeah. I don't know. I heard some things about it like being this one guy, but he died in 2016. So like getting DNA evidence is hard because they would have to like get permits and stuff to dig him up. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, well, the thing about it, they could get DNA from a relative if they know who he is.
yeah.
So I don't know why they couldn't just do that, but whatever. Maybe he didn't have any relatives. It happens.
I I don't know. It makes me think too much, and the fact that there's like not an actual like solution to it, just like it makes my brain hurt.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so we're doing the next episode on Whitley Strieber, and I just wanted to know like what you thought about him and his works and what he went through.
Yeah, we actually it's funny because we reviewed the movie Communion not too long ago with Christopher Walken, which I had forgotten how crazy that movie was. But I love Christopher Walken. Honestly, I read Communion a very long time ago. And I wasn't sure that I bought it. I wasn't really sure that I bought like what his experience was. I mean, I
Yeah,
didn't know if it was just like a fictional story and he's like, "Oh, it'll sell better if I say that it's true," or you know what I mean? I suspected that it probably wasn't true. So, I don't know. So cuz I'm not saying that I don't believe that aliens exist. I think they do, but I think the whole alien abduction thing, like the classic alien abduction story,
yeah,
I don't think that that usually happens the way people say it does. I mean, I'm very skeptical about that. I will say that Whitley Strieber, the only other book of his that I've read was The Hunger, and I feel like a lot of people haven't read that, even though they turned it into like a really, really awesome vampire movie in 1983, which had David Bowie and Catherine Deneuve and Susan Sarandon in it. And the book was pretty good. I actually like it filled in a lot more history about it. So, I mean, it's been a long time since I've read that too. And like, I liked the movie better, which doesn't usually happen, but that's pretty much all that I know about his work. And I don't know a huge amount other than, like I said, I did read Communion, but it was probably 20, 25 years ago, something like that. I did see the movie recently, but I can't remember how accurate the movie was to
to
the
the
book
book.
because the
Yeah,
movie is pretty crazy. The movie's pretty crazy. And then most of that's just because Christopher Walken is in it and he made some very interesting choices, like the way that he's doing that character. So,
yeah.
it's a really entertaining movie though, but it's very strange.
It's on my watch list. So, where or how do you find your inspiration for your horror novels?
Usually, a lot of it is based on real things. Just well, here's the thing. What I used to do, like now I've gotten a lot more back into reading other people's horror fiction, which for a long time I didn't because for years and years I went off on kind of like a nonfiction kind of thing where I was just like reading tons and tons of nonfiction books, usually about I read a lot of science books, I read a lot of I don't know, just stuff about kind of like social or cultural kind of things, like anthropology, like that kind of stuff. So a lot of times I would be reading something like that and some little factoid somewhere, about, I don't know, like evolution or something like that would kind of stick in my brain. And then I would start thinking, okay, but what if like this happened, like this real thing happened, but then like it went off in this other crazy direction, and then I would kind of be off to the races. And like I said, the new novel I've been working on is actually I got the idea from a true crime case that really just it really stuck in my it's like it was just like a really really weird case, like the details about it, and it just really stuck in my mind. And I was like, man, I would really like to write, because they still hasn't been solved even though it happened in the 1930s. And I was like, I would really love to kind of have a background of that story, because the details of, the way that they found the guy were like so strange. And I said, I'm going to write like a whole fictional and possibly supernatural like backstory to how that ended up like that, because it like fascinated me, because I couldn't really think of like a realistic well, I mean, I guess I could, but I couldn't really think of like that much of a realistic way that it would end up like that, because it was like really, really strange.
Yeah.
So most of my horror fiction, it's usually like the germ of an idea of something that really happened. Like I would be reading an article or reading a book about something, and then like a little detail would just kind of just stick out to me, and then I would just kind of expand upon that. That's usually what happens. Or a lot of times too, I'll come across like a phrase that I like the sound of, and I'll write a story based around that phrase. Like it was like, oh, I'll title it that, and then whatever ideas that gives me, then I'll start like writing around that idea.
Okay. So, I was told to ask you about something.
Uh-oh.
Um, if I butcher how it's pronounced, I'm sorry. The Inokashira Park dismemberment incident.
Oh, right, yeah. I think it is the Inokashira.
Inokashira? Okay.
Yeah.
What is that?
That was basically, it was just a guy, and I can't remember like all of the details. I did a video about it a couple weeks ago, but it was just a guy in Japan, and he was just a regular dude. Like he didn't really have anything weird about him. He wasn't like involved in any criminal activity or anything that they know of. And he was just in Inokashira Park, which is kind of like a big park, I think, in Tokyo. And they just like a woman came to the park one morning to like empty the garbage cans, like she did every morning. And in one of the garbage cans was basically just a cut up human being, and it turned out being this guy, and they have no idea who killed him or why, like what the motive was. And as far as I know, it hasn't happened again. Like the only thing I remember, they said that somebody said that they heard like a car screeching or something like the night before, and they were like, oh well, maybe like a car hit him, and then they were like, oh no, like we have to hide the body. I'm like, yeah, but
If
he
he's
was
cut up,
cut up. It's like that
yeah.
seems like a lot of effort, when normally you would just like leave him, and you just leave the scene if you don't want to get caught. Don't
Yeah.
stay there forever and like cut him all up and put him in the garbage can. That seems a little strange. But yeah, that was a very interesting case. But I mean, because Japan, like their crime rate is very, very low. But when they do have ones, they tend to have these really, really crazy ones that turn out really. Because what was that
Yeah.
one that was like the whole family that was butchered in the house? And I can't remember what their names are now, but that was like pretty messed up too. Like where somebody came in and killed the whole family, and then like hung out like in their house, like ate some of
Yeah.
their food, and like went to the bathroom in their house and didn't flush, and like all this. I was
I
for
can't.
some reason that detail like stuck out to me. But he was just like in there for hours and hours, and I was like,
Yeah.
and they have no idea like why he did it. So that was also very crazy.
I can't remember if it was in Japan, but I really want to say it was. But the Hello Kitty case, I want to say that
Yeah,
was from
yeah,
Japan.
yeah.
That
I
one stuck with me.
Yeah, I actually but I think somebody recommended that we do a show about that, but I hadn't got around to it yet because usually it like a lot of times like because we do a lot of live streams and like people will be in the chat and they'll be like, "Oh, you should do a show about this, you should do a show about that." And so I try to write them all down. So I have this massive list of like all these topics that we haven't got to yet. And what I usually do is every week I'll pick just 5 of them at random and then I'll put them in because we have some patrons and I usually put them in a poll like to let people vote on what they want us to do the show about. So I think that somebody recommended that and we just haven't got around to doing the show yet because it didn't get enough votes, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it's also like an extremely popular case, but it's just I don't something about it I don't like. I don't like any
Yeah,
of it.
yeah.
But so what cases stand out to you in the Faceless Villain?
Well, the one that I'm basing my novel on happened in 1935 and it's usually called the Horror in Room 1046. I think it's 1046. And it's basically this guy who checked into a hotel and he didn't have any luggage or he didn't have any stuff. Like he just had, I think all he had in his pocket was like a brush and a comb and something. And so he checks in and he's basically like, I wanted a room that doesn't face the street. So they thought that maybe he was like hiding from somebody. And I don't know, there was just like all these really weird like details. He was there for a couple of days. And then like a few days after that, that he'd been staying there, they actually went up to his room and found that he'd been tortured and stabbed. Like he was still alive when they went up there, but he died later on at the hospital. And then after he died, they found out that the name that he checked in under wasn't his real name and that he'd actually maybe been traveling around the country like under different names and they didn't actually figure out who he actually was until I think like a year or two later, like when they had a picture of his body, like his his face or whatever, and they put it in a true crime magazine, and like a friend of his mom's saw it and said, "Hey, isn't that your son?" And then they finally like identified who he was, but they still have no idea, like because he made all these weird phone calls and there was just like all kind of like really creepy stuff like about this case,
Yeah.
and they couldn't figure out who he was or if he was hiding from somebody or if people were after him. It's like he didn't really seem like people were chasing him, but a lot of the stuff was like really shifty and he was like all these fake names and he was like moving from place to place, and it's just I don't know, it's just like a really bizarre, like all the details of it are really bizarre. And that really stuck with me, particularly from the first book, like from the 1930s, because for whatever reason, I have more of a fascination, I think. Like I'm fascinated with all kind of crimes, but I have more of a fascination with ones that are older. Like because I really
Yeah.
like I and actually I was thinking about writing a true crime book about unsolved murders from like the 19th century because I did like the whole 20th century, but like the early ones really, I don't know, there's something about them that's like a lot more fascinating to me, maybe because I know that they'll probably never be solved, so
Yeah.
they're so old, so you can kind of just like come up with your own theories about them. So it's like everyone's theory is basically as good as another one because they're never going to
Yeah.
figure it out. So maybe that's why like that I'm so into those. But that was definitely one that stuck out to me. And there was another one too, and I can't remember exactly what year it happened. I think it was also 1930s, if I'm not mistaken. But there was one that happened. Where was I think it was was it Sweden? I want to say it was Sweden, but it was Atlas Vampire. It was like a woman and she was a sex worker, and they found her in her apartment and all of her blood had been drained out. And they also found like a bloody, like a gravy ladle, like somebody had ladled all her blood. Like there was no blood anywhere, like on the bed or anything like that where they found her. So almost like somebody like drained all her blood out and like meticulously like drank it, like using a ladle. I mean, maybe that's not what happened, but that's
Yeah.
what they call it, the Atlas Vampire case, because they're like, well, her blood had to go somewhere because it's not here. So
Yeah.
and then that was the only thing they found with blood on it was a gravy ladle. So So that was like pretty weird too.
That's pretty strange. I
Yeah,
don't.
it was like that was a
Hmm.
very, very weird case.
Um, so I know you said you have more interest in like the older cases, and ever since I was like not necessarily little, but like in like sixth or seventh grade, I've had this like story that's been like stuck in my head, and it's the story of H. Holmes.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious as like how you feel and think about it.
Yeah, that is also a very fascinating case. And actually we did I feel like we did a show about that like quite a while back. And I remember reading a book about him where the guy was basically he's like, well, he wasn't like excusing, he's like he wasn't saying that like H. Holmes wasn't a serial killer or anything like that. But he was saying that a lot of the stuff that happened subsequently, like all of the stories about him, like of the murder castle and like the greased chutes that he had like in the house and everything like that was maybe a little bit exaggerated. But I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, for sure he was a serial killer and he was
Yeah,
killing people in there. And so but I don't know how much of, because the media like made a lot about of
yeah,
his like thing after that, like all the, oh, he had rooms that had little holes drilled in the walls, they could like shoot gas in there and stuff like that. And I don't know like how much of that is true and how much of that was
yeah,
exaggerated. And again, that's another thing that kind of fascinates me too, is that cases that happened that long ago, a lot of times you're not entirely sure, because I mean the newspapers back then, I mean people talk about about stuff being exaggerated or stuff nowadays, but back then I feel like a lot of newspapers didn't really feel any compunction at all to be truthful. They just wanted to sell papers.
yeah,
So they, and there were a lot more newspapers in the cities, so they were like a lot more competition. So they're like, well, we don't have any more salacious details than this other paper, so we're just gonna like make up some stuff. The more salacious and the more gory and gruesome, the better, because that would sell better.
yeah.
So sometimes, even if you go back to the original newspaper source, you're not entirely sure if that's
True.
really what happened or if they were just trying to sell more papers by being more grotesque. Like
Yeah,
when I was researching the books, I did try to go back to the original sources as much as possible, and I tried to find at least two, if not more. And a lot of times they would differ like a great deal, because some of them were adding, they were embellishing some details maybe. So I tried to keep things, it's like, well, if this is embellished and this one said this, then it's probably somewhere in between. So I try
yeah.
to kind of keep it balanced a little
And it's
bit.
it's really hard to have like a layout of everything too, because didn't they like tear everything down like less than a year later or something
Yeah,
like that? Yeah.
yeah. That's what
So
I mean. It wasn't that long later, so anything that came out after that, they could have just added on whatever, and it's not like you could check
exactly.
because it's gone. So,
Yeah. I mean, it kind of makes me sad in the sense that it's gone, but at the same time, I don't want that being around. So,
yeah, I mean,
um, so I was doing a little digging on your website, and I came across Grave Cake, and I don't know how to Galileo Games.
oh, Giallo. Yeah.
Giallo, yeah.
Yeah, Giallo, yeah.
So what is that?
Well, Grave Cake was actually a site I don't actually even really I mean, it's still up, but I don't really maintain it that much anymore. It was just like a store that I started a long time ago that had like a bunch of my designs and stuff on it.
Okay.
But Giallo Games, I started that out on the Game Crafter because I love, love, love designing board games.
Hmm.
And, the Game Crafter, I don't know if you know, but it's a site where, you can upload all of your components, and then they have components for sale, and you can put all your game together, and then they have a platform where you can sell it. So it's print on demand, like,
Yeah.
like book publishing would be. So I got really excited about that, and I started doing a bunch of games. Originally, my original idea was all of the games were going to be based around giallo movies, like Italian
Hmm.
horror films. And the first few games that I did were like that. So I did one called A Crimson Drop on a Crystal Palette, which was it's like a murder mystery, but like with an Italian kind of flair to it, and like it's gory and stuff. And then I did a couple other ones like that were just kind of about giallo movies. And then I started expanding out into doing other things. Like I did an Edgar Allan Poe game. I did like an absinthe game where you go to like different absinthe bars, like from Paris, like back in the day when that was a big thing. And, I did one based around like Mary Shelley and Percy Shelley and Lord Byron, like, them writing, like her writing Frankenstein. I did one about that. And so for a long time, I was kind of like, well, probably I should change the name from Giallo games now, because they're not all Giallo games. Now they're based on like other things, but I just haven't got around to doing it yet. And actually, like last year, I did a big, huge Halloween one that's basically like a little Halloween town, and you have to go and like, you have to buy candy and buy a little costume and like put a little costume on your person and go around like, kind of
Yeah.
killing this demon or whatever. So, but yeah, that's honestly, that's one of my favorite things to do. And I'm thinking about doing another one. Again, I haven't had time to do it yet, but I have the idea and everything's laid out. I want to do one that's kind of based around like a seance. You know what I mean? I want that Victorian spiritualism seance kind of thing, like from the early, like late 19th, early 20th century. I want to
Yeah.
do a game like that, but like where there's kind of like some kind of component where you're at a seance and you're trying to like be psychic and like guess like what the other people
Yeah.
are, like the ghosts they're contacting and stuff. So that's like one that I'm working on at the moment.
Well, when you get that one done, I need to know.
Okay.
So the poltergeist, the Rain Man case. What? Just a little brief description of what that is.
Yeah, that was a guy. I actually initially saw this on, how was it, Unsolved Mysteries? I want to say it was probably on Unsolved Mysteries. But yeah, he was a guy who, I guess what ended up happening with him was he was in jail, I think at the beginning, and he apparently could make it rain. It was like some kind of poltergeist activity, apparently. I guess he got let out like to go to his dad's funeral, and then he went and stayed with some friends of the family or whatever. And while he was there, like all kind of crazy stuff started happening, like all the pans and stuff started rattling in the kitchen. And I think like he kind of floated, or he was like levitating, or he like would pulled back against the wall or something. And I think he even saw like an apparition, maybe like of his dad, I think in the mirror or the window or something. But the big thing was that he could apparently make it rain like inside the house. And this was apparently witnessed by a bunch of his family members. And also when he went back to jail, because he'd been on a furlough for the funeral, when he went back to jail, apparently he could make it rain in his jail cell. And apparently like a bunch of people, like guards and stuff, saw that as well. And I think maybe the warden saw it. Like he was able to kind of like, I think he was even able to make it rain, or at least like throw water on the warden, like from across the thing, if I'm remembering correctly. But I don't know, I wonder whatever happened to that guy, because I think what happened was he got out of jail. And then I think later on he went back to jail for arson. I think him and a friend or a family member, like they set something on fire, like for insurance money or something. And then like he went back to jail after that. And I think he sort of like dropped off the face of the earth after that. But he was on, it was kind of a big thing for a while. I remember he was on Unsolved Mysteries for sure. And then I think maybe there was another like paranormal show that had him on there as well. But that seemed to be, it almost seemed like he was manifesting rain as almost kind of like a, I don't even know if it was like a grief type of thing.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure, but yeah, he was like making it, the inside of his I guess it was like family friends he was staying with during the funeral, and they basically said, yeah, like there was rain coming down like from the ceiling, and they looked and there was no leaks or anything. So yeah, that was like pretty weird.
I think the idea of the Rain Man committing arson is pretty funny.
Yeah, I kind of found that funny too.
So the poltergeist in the House of Blood in Atlanta.
Yeah, that was another, that's very unusual, because I kind of feel like, I sort of put things out in the poltergeist books, because there was like a lot of ones that started fires. There was a couple rain ones. There was a Steve Mara one that I wrote about too, where, there was that was Rochdale, where that was, they had rain inside the house too. But you didn't really have that many where there was blood manifestations. And the weird thing about this one is that there was nobody there at that particular house. It was just like an older couple, like they were elderly, like married couple that had lived there for a while. And I don't think they'd had any weird stuff happen at their house before. But for whatever reason, just one day, they came and there was like a puddle. I think it was like a puddle of blood, and they thought, oh well, one of them had gotten hurt, but nobody did. And then it just seemed like like puddles of blood were like appearing in their house. And I don't think it lasted even that long. Like I think they moved out eventually, and then like the next people that moved in didn't see anything. But yeah, that was like because there didn't really seem to be usually, in those kind of cases, you'd have some kind of like family turmoil, or you'd have
Mm-hmm.
like a teenager or something like that that would maybe explain, why this had happened. But apparently there was nothing weird about these two. They had just, like I said, it was just an elderly couple. They had lived there for a long time. They weren't, there's nothing weird going on, but for
Yeah,
whatever reason, they just reported seeing blood everywhere. And I think they actually did call the cops at first because they didn't think it was paranormal. They just thought, oh, well, maybe an animal got in
yeah,
and bled everywhere, but they couldn't find anything. And then the cops came in, and I think they sealed off the house because for a while they thought it was a crime scene, so they weren't really sure if anybody was dead in there. But and I
they
think
didn't
they
find
did they
anyone.
did blood typing too, and it was like a different type than either one of them. So it wasn't either one of their blood. And they never did find a body or anything. So that was also very strange.
That's very strange. The fact
Yeah.
that it was a different type of blood, that's strange.
Yeah. I mean, I
Um,
think it was still human, but it wasn't like either one
yeah,
of their types. Yeah.
that's weird. And they didn't have like pets or anything.
No.
It was
No.
just those two.
Yeah, it was just those two. That's what I mean. It's just very, very odd. Very odd.
That's so strange. Stuff like that that's like you can't fully have a explanation for it. It makes me think too much and then I'm like, I don't want to hear about it anymore. I'm thinking and my brain hurts. um, so where can people find your books, your YouTube channel, and you?
Well, probably the easiest thing to do. I have a website. It's just jennyashford.com. And that has links to most of my stuff. And the YouTube show, just go on YouTube and search 13 o'clock podcast, and you'll find all the stuff. I also have another channel that's called Scare Salon, and that's all horror stuff. I post 2 videos a week over there. And then I have one called Crime Immemorial, and I post 2 videos a week on that one too. That's just unsolved murder cases. The Scare Salon one is mostly just random. I talk about horror books or horror movies, or it's just like whatever I feel. It's mostly older stuff, but there's new stuff on there too. Like I reviewed the Guillermo del Toro show, Cabinet of Curiosities, on there and stuff. But 13 o'clock podcast, we do a main show. Like on Wednesday night, it's always a live stream, and it's usually true crime. Sometimes it's paranormal. Sometimes it's like weird history. We do stuff like that too. And then Friday night, we do a live stream that's just sidetracks. It's just we talk about whatever, and usually get pretty drunk and just like talk about whatever the people in the chat want to talk about. And then we do a couple movie reviews. Mondays, we talk about that paranormal show, A Haunting. We just pick a random episode and talk about that. And that's a live stream also. And then we just like post other things randomly, movie reviews usually, and I do book reviews too. But yeah, so that's kind of the main thing. But and also if you search Jenny Ashford on Amazon, all my books should come up on there because I do have an Amazon author page also.
Nice. Okay, well, thank you so much for today. It was amazing talking to you.
Well, thanks very much for having me on
Yeah,
here.
of course. Thank you for watching Nevaeh's Nightmare. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, comment, and just let me know how you felt about today's episode.